with Kris Barnett in his guitar workshop, and we're going to take a look at a guitar that's in progress right now. Kris, can you explain kind of what's going on with these parts?
Yeah, this guitar is probably about halfway finished, so I have most of the major components that will eventually be glued together and eventually form a guitar. So this is a nearly completed soundboard. These braces right here are needed to resist the pull of the strings. If we were just to have a regular thickness of a soundboard, with the pull of the strings, it would actually break or deform the soundboard. So these braces help keep everything in check. So all that would need to be done with this soundboard in order to put it to, on the guitar itself would be 2 more braces here, and then what's called a pad right here. And then this would go onto the sides of the guitar like that.
And those are Brazilian rosewood.
Yeah, these are Brazilian rosewood. So traditionally, the methodology would be that this would be one solid piece of wood, and then you would take those pieces and put it onto a machine that looks like this. And this is basically like a hot pad that will get to about 450 degrees. So you wet the straight pieces of wood, put it on here, and then clamp everything down, and it will eventually form to the shape of the instrument. The way that I do it, however, is a little bit different. So there's actually 4 different laminates or thinner pieces of wood that are actually glued together. And what that does is it makes the sides much stiffer than if you were to use solid wood. And at least in my idea, it will lend to having a more robust, a little bit of a louder instrument.
And then would this be considered a lattice brace or a fan brace?
Yeah, sort of. When you say lattice brace, a lot of times that kind of triggers the Australian school, like Greg Smallman and some of the builders out there. And that's not really where I'm trying to go with the instruments. There is kind of like a lattice structure underneath here, but I try to retain a lot of the traditional qualities of a traditionally built instrument, kind of having a little bit of a rounder sound, not having so much punch to the instrument. So I've developed kind of my own bracing pattern to where it's almost like 2 traditionally fan-strutted type fan braces overlapped on top of one another, rather than just intersecting braces that you would have on a more typical lattice instrument. And this proportion, all the dimensions are based on phi, which is the golden ratio, the Fibonacci sequence, which is kind of just this weird thing that I came up with. So that's kind of why the pattern looks like that.
Can you show us the rosette real quick? Kind of.
Yeah. So a lot of traditional instruments will have what's called like a mosaic rosette, which is sometimes thousands, tens of thousands of little pieces that will go together to make some kind of pattern that will go around the sound hole. I typically use metal, which as far as I know, I'm the only one that uses metal in the rosettes on classical guitars. So this one uses bronze and ebony, and there's also black limba, which are these little checks right here. But all in all, I would say that this rosette is probably about 5,000 individual pieces that all go around that have to be perfectly fitted. If not, you would be able to very clearly see any flaws in the rosette. So, and everything's handmade in the shop. These tiles all have to be mitered at the correct angle so that they fit correctly going around the sound hole.
And at this point, it's a very delicate piece of wood.
Yeah. As we start adding braces, it becomes less so. But cedar is very susceptible. It's a very soft wood, much more so than spruce, which would be the kind of the counterpart to cedar. But you have to be really careful when you're dealing with cedar, because any specks of wood or anything that's on the bench will actually put indentations in the soundboard. So you do have to exercise a lot of caution when working with cedar. So a lot of people don't understand with the soundboard that there's actually 2 pieces of wood. There's a center seam that goes down the middle here. So this is what the soundboard looks like, before it is basically jointed or made perfectly straight. And once the joint is perfectly straight, these 2 pieces get glued together like this, and then you would go ahead and inlay the rosette, thin it to the right dimension, and then do all the bracing. So it's actually 2 different pieces. This is called book matching. So this would be one solid piece of wood. You'd cut it in half and then open it like a book, glue it together.
And do you do that with the back as well?
Yeah, you do. So usually you get a lot of faces and symmetrical objects, when you look at guitars. So whenever you see something, this is just sapwood. So there isn't actually like a third piece that's going down here. This is just the outer edge, I guess, of the tree. It's a lot lighter than what's called the hardwood, which is the darker stuff. So yeah, this piece is the same thing. There would be, you know, a wider piece or a thicker piece that would be cut down the center, opened up, and that's where you get that sapwood, that symmetrical figure in the middle.
Cool. And you put a slight arch in the back?
Yeah, and there's kind of a lot of differences, you know, between my guitar and kind of a more traditional instrument. The backs on my guitars are about 3 times thicker than, you know, a traditional back. So there would be this one has 9 plies of wood. So there's 2 faces of Brazilian wood or Brazilian rosewood, and then 7 plies of maple. And there's kind of a complex methodology for getting everything to adhere to one another and to get these to mate properly and to get everything so it looks like a back, which probably exceeds the scope of this video.
And that's for the sound.
Yeah, it has nothing to do, you know, with a lot of factory guitars or less expensive guitars. They also do what would be considered like a laminated back and sometimes a laminated top. The methodology is quite a bit different, though we use like standard wood glue, which I use a very strong laminating adhesive for my backs. And they're just basically trying to cut costs, where this is actually much more time consuming than it would be for me to plane, you know, a regular piece and put braces on it. But yeah, the main or the primary purpose of all this is just for sound. It doesn't have anything to do with cutting costs or, you know, cutting time or anything like that. It's all for sonic benefit.
Great. Cool. What about the neck of the guitar?
This is the neck. There's a little bit of there's a V joint, which is a little bit more difficult than what a traditional guitar would have, which is called a scarf joint. But these all just start off as billets. It starts off as one piece of wood, and then we have to dimension. You can see I haven't really started carving, you know, any of the profiles for the neck itself. So where this is, I'll have to put a head plate over here, put a head plate over here, and I will do a channel that I'll install the truss rod, you know, which allows you to kind of change the curvature of the neck, which is really helpful when you're doing the final setup on the instrument. And then this fingerboard will get dimensioned and then get glued to the top of that, and at the end it'll get bolted to the instrument.
Very cool. So about how far along is this guitar, and when do you anticipate it being finished?
Usually takes about a month of actual work, meaning, you know, I'll let it sit for a couple of weeks after the finish has been applied for it to dry before I'll send it to the customer. This I have been working on for probably about a week and a half. So I'd say probably another 2.5, 3.5 weeks, something like that, and this should be kind of finished, and then we can let it dry and kind of become a guitar. And the other thing that's interesting, you know, depending on the choice of woods that you're using for the soundboard, cedar tends to be kind of ready to go once you're done with the guitar. My instruments will grow up or mature, however you want to put it, within about a year. You know, so there's going to be a pretty big difference from when I first build it. After about a year or so, you're going to notice that a lot of times it'll increase the volume a little bit. It'll sound more open. It'll sound less green. Whereas if you were building with spruce, there's actually a lot more time involved in the guitar becoming mature. So you're talking, you know, it could be anywhere from 5 to 30 years for the guitar to really kind of start blossoming and doing what it's going to eventually do. So,
and that's,
you know,
just the nature of the wood.
Yeah, and people have different rationales for why that happens. Some people say it's like, you know, the sap and everything in the wood crystallizes over time, or the fact that it's just learning to be a guitar as opposed to a tree, you know, whatever. But yeah, so that would be one of the deciding factors when you're looking at guitars. You know, are you willing to be patient and kind of you know, wait for the benefit of the guitar opening up, or do you want something that's ready to go that's going to sound as good as it does within a couple of months?
Mm-hmm.
So.
Neat. Do you ever build multiple guitars at the same time?
I have tried that, and I do not like that. Yeah, I feel like I can't really pay as much attention to the details when I have multiple things going on. And it's really rewarding for me to finish this and be done and put it aside and not have to do that again. You know, so the guitars get finished a lot quicker when I do them individually. And a lot of people will build multiple instruments just because they have, you know, a tool set up and they can run 6 of them and put the tool away, and they don't have to set it up each time when they redo another guitar. But I've built multiple instruments. The most I've ever built was 3 at a time, and it was not a good experience for me. And I found that it doesn't really save me any time. When I build 2 or 3 instruments, it would be the same if I were just to start one, finish it, and then immediately start another. So there's really no benefit at all for me to build multiple instruments. So when I build individually, I can devote every bit of my attention to this one guitar, and I don't have to worry about, oh, does this part go with this, or what's. It's just confusing for me to build more than one instrument, so I just prefer to do individual instruments.
Neat. Well, building a guitar is clearly a very creative process. And what would you say is the most rewarding part of this whole endeavor for you?
It's a really good question. It was just the idea of, and I think about this a lot of times because, where my workshop isn't the safest area. There's a lot of crime and stuff. And, sometimes I get worried that somebody would break in and, steal my guitars. And then for me, one of the most interesting and most rewarding things is none of this stuff has much value until I put my hands to it. So if somebody were to come in, even if a guitar was 90% finished, it doesn't mean anything. They would have something that is essentially worthless, because another luthier probably wouldn't be able to pick up where I left off. So the reward comes in knowing that, like there's a couple of $100s worth of materials here, and it's my time, and it's my energy, and it's my hands that are eventually going to create something that has value. And that's cool,
right.
I think. So that's very rewarding, just knowing that it's just materials, and then once I spend time with it, it'll be a guitar that somebody will hopefully enjoy for the rest of their lives.
Well, thank you so much, Kris Barnett Guitars.
Absolutely.